Deep in the pre-dawn darkness of September 14, 1943, specifically at 2:47 a.m., the volcanic stone of Monte Cassino in Italy felt colder than death against the cheek of Private First Class Angelo Bianchi, a 22-year-old dock worker from South Philadelphia who found himself in a position that military doctrine explicitly forbade, pressed against the rock, watching Italian soldiers maneuver through the pitch-black ravine 300 yards below. Bianchi was painfully aware that he had only 17 rounds remaining in his Springfield rifle, 0 radio contact, and no hope of reinforcements for at least another day and a half. Behind him, the ravine held the bodies of his squad, and ahead of him lay the seemingly impossible task of holding a strategic ridge that the U.S. Marine Corps had failed to secure 4 times in the previous 6 days, an objective so deadly the Marines had simply christened it Suicide Ridge. In the grueling 14 hours that followed, this lone Marine would go on to kill 76 enemy combatants, hold off an entire company, and force the Marine Corps to fundamentally rewrite its defensive manuals, all while facing the very real threat of a court-martial for the unorthodox methods he employed to do it. The ridge, nameless on official maps, had become a graveyard where 137 casualties had been sustained with 0 successful holds, lasting more than 8 hours, a statistic that stemmed not from the difficulty of taking the ground, but the impossibility of keeping it due to the unique topography. Angelo Bianchi was not a typical soldier. He was a product of the rough, labor-intensive streets of South Philly, having grown up 3 blocks from the Delaware River waterfront where he began hauling 100-pound grain sacks at age 14, a job that built his physical frame, while the alley fights behind the Reading Terminal Market honed a different kind of strength, patience. Unlike other neighborhood kids who threw wild, exhausting punches, Angelo had learned from his uncle Tony, a professional boxer, that the fighter who controls the range controls the fight, a philosophy of making the opponent reach and exposing their vulnerabilities that Angelo carried from the streets to the rifle range at Paris Island. His drill instructors had noted his unique rhythm. While others fired instantly upon sighting, Angelo waited that extra fraction of a second to let the target settle, earning him expert qualifications at every distance from 23 to 500 yards with iron sights, establishing a mantra that slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. This patience was tested when he arrived in the Mediterranean theater, first in North Africa and Sicily, before facing the deadly puzzle of the Italian ridges where standard Marine Corps doctrine, forged in WWY and island-hopping campaigns, demanded defenders dig in at the military crest, the highest point offering cover, to establish overlapping fields of fire. The fatal flaw in this doctrine, when applied to the volcanic mountains north of Salerno, was the terrain's natural dead zones, areas where attacking forces could amass unseen until they were within 300 yards, compressing the defenders' reaction time to a mere 18 minutes between first sighting and being overrun by grenades. Angelo had watched this tragedy play out 4 times in 3 days. He saw Corporal Vincent Russo's squad overrun at Hill 424, Lieutenant Patrick Sullivan's team flanked and destroyed despite following every rule, and Sergeant David Goldstein's unit wiped out in close quarters combat. But the breaking point was the death of his friend Private Thomas Martinez, who died with a full magazine because the enemy was on top of him before he could effectively engage. Sitting in a bomb crater that night, Angelo did the grim math. 52 dead Marines, an average engagement distance of 320 yards, and a doctrine that was technically correct, but practically suicidal in this specific terrain. And when he brought his concerns to the chain of command, the response was a bureaucratic dismissal stating that casualties were within acceptable parameters. That phrase, acceptable parameters, gnawed at Angelo as he lay in his foxhole, driving him to conclude that the only way to survive was to violate the most sacred rule of defensive warfare. He had to leave the safety of the military crest and move forward into the exposed slope to spot the enemy before they massed. When Second Lieutenant Hayes ordered Angelo to take a squad of 8 men and hold Suicide Ridge until reinforcements arrived in 36 hours, everyone understood it was a death sentence. Yet Angelo positioned his squad according to doctrine at the crest, including the BAR gunner, Private Robert Washington, before informing them he was going forward alone, a move that confused his squad and risked his career. Armed with his Springfield, 60 extra rounds, grenades, and an entrenching tool, Angelo descended 80 yards down the forward slope, completely exposed to artillery and sniper fire, to a cluster of volcanic rocks that offered a direct view into the ravines 540 yards away, a position that violated every manual but offered the one thing the doctrine didn't: visibility. He scraped out a shallow hide, settled his rifle on the warm rocks, and waited in the silence until 3:20 hours, when the shapes of Italian soldiers began to coalesce in the darkness below, massing in the ravine mouth 560 yards out, unaware that they were being watched. Faced with the choice of retreating to warn his squad, which would allow the enemy to close the distance, or engaging alone and risking a court-martial, Angelo chose the latter, calculating his shots with the methodical precision of a sniper. He targeted the NCO directing the troops, exhaling and squeezing the trigger, dropping the leader and causing chaos among the Italians who instinctively fired up at the military crest where they expected the Marines to be, sending hundreds of rounds snapping harmlessly over Angelo's head. For hours, Angelo operated in a rhythm of cold efficiency, target, breathe, squeeze, bolt, decimating the enemy ranks, destroying their machine gun teams, and pinning down flanking maneuvers while his own squad on the ridge above remained largely unengaged. By the time the sun began to lighten the sky at 4:35 hours, revealing his position to spotters, Angelo had already killed or wounded nearly a dozen men, and despite the verbal warning from his squadmate Callahan about the impending court-martial, Angelo held his ground as the second wave of 60 soldiers launched a coordinated assault. The battle intensified as the enemy, realizing the fire was coming from a forward rock cluster, directed suppressing fire and squad rushes at him, forcing Angelo to prioritize targets, officers, machine gunners, anyone stationary, while his rifle barrel grew hot enough to burn the stock's finish and stone chips from enemy fire drew blood from his face and arms. When an Italian squad managed to close within 200 yards, Angelo pinned them down until they retreated, and even when mortar fire began to rain down, the rounds overshot him, landing harmlessly near the military crest, because the enemy gunners couldn't conceive of a lone rifleman operating so far forward. The arrival of the BAR's distinctive roar from the ridge above at 7:10 hours provided a crucial distraction, allowing Angelo to engage soldiers regrouping in the western ravine, though his ammunition supply was dwindling dangerously low. A brief, surreal interlude of professional courtesy occurred when a white flag appeared, and Angelo allowed the Italians 20 minutes to collect their dead and wounded, a grim testament to the sheer volume of casualties he had inflicted single-handedly. But the respite was short-lived, and at 8:55 hours, a massive third wave of 80 soldiers supported by machine guns surged forward, suppressing Angelo's position with such intensity he could feel the pressure waves of the bullets, yet he waited for the infantry to expose themselves before popping up to fire, constantly shifting his position within the rock cluster to avoid being pinned. The physical toll was mounting. His hands shook, his rifle jammed, requiring a terrifying clearance drill under fire, and he was forced to throw back enemy grenades. But the psychological impact on the Italians was worse. They broke and retreated, leaving Angelo with only 8 rounds and a watch reading 10-15 hours. He had been fighting for over 7 hours, accumulating 43 kills, while his squad behind him had barely fired a shot, a disparity that highlighted the effectiveness of his forbidden tactic. As the afternoon wore on, his squad resupplied him by tossing a bandolier down the slope, accompanied by another warning from the captain about the court-martial, to which Angelo responded with dark humor. The final test came at 15:25 hours, in the form of a fourth massive wave of over 100 soldiers supported by artillery that walked dangerously close to his position. Angelo, down to his last magazine, fired methodically at the leaders until his bolt locked back on an empty chamber. With the enemy closing to 70 yards, he used his last 2 grenades to break the assault's momentum, then stood ready with his kabar knife and entrenching tool, fully expecting to die in hand-to-hand combat. But the shattered Italian force, demoralized by the relentless precision fire, began an ordered withdrawal. It wasn't until nearly 17 o'clock hours that American artillery finally hammered the ravines, sealing the victory, and a physically wrecked Angelo climbed back up to the military crest, his uniform soaked in sweat and blood, his legs failing him, to be met by the stunned silence of his squadmates and the angry, conflicting reaction of Captain Hayes. Hayes, torn between the undeniable reality of the saved ridge and the flagrant violation of orders, confiscated Angelo's rifle as evidence and placed him under investigation, leading to a 3-day limbo, where battalion staff argued over whether to treat him as a hero or a criminal. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Buchanan, a fellow Philadelphian, eventually brokered the cynical compromise, a permanent letter of reprimand for Angelo to satisfy the doctrine purists, exchanged for the quiet, unofficial adoption of Angelo's forward listening post tactics to stop the bleeding in the division. Buchanan frankly told Angelo that while he had saved lives, The Corps couldn't admit their doctrine was flawed without a scandal, so Angelo was ordered to repeat the tactic at the next ridge, this time with written orders to cover the officers' backs. Word of the Bianchi method spread through the enlisted ranks faster than any memo, with Marines across the Italian campaign quietly adopting the practice of positioning riflemen forward of the crest, leading to a confirmed 37% drop in defensive casualties between September and December 1943. Other Marines like Private Joseph Lombardi and Corporal Michael O'Brien successfully utilized the tactic at Mignano and Montelongo, cementing its utility even as the official reports studiously avoided crediting the Italian kid from Philly who started it. Angelo continued to fight through Monte Cassino, Anzio, and the push to Rome, earning a Purple Heart and a vague combat citation that deliberately obscured the details of his actions at Suicide Ridge, while he quietly trained other Marines in the art of the forward ambush behind mess tents. By 1944, the undeniable success of these security elements forced the Marine Corps to officially incorporate the tactic into the Small Unit Leadership Manual, buried in Section 7.3.4, sanitizing the innovation of its rebellious origins. When the war ended, Angelo returned to Philadelphia, to the same row house and the same docks, slipping back into civilian life with a stoic silence, burying the trauma and the glory beneath the rhythm of unloading cargo ships. He married Teresa, the cousin of a fallen friend, raised a family on the principles of hard work and self-reliance, and refused all attempts by historians and the Marine Corps to interview him or celebrate his legacy, viewing his actions simply as a necessary job rather than heroism. He died in 2003, his obituary, omitting the 76 kills and the tactical revolution he sparked, his funeral attended by only a handful of old Marines who knew the truth. It wasn't until 2008 that history officially caught up, with a footnote in a massive volume, finally crediting him, and later a case study at the Marine Corps University teaching officers the value of breaking rules to save lives. Angelo Bianchi's legacy wasn't found in the medals he didn't receive or the rank he was denied, but in the thousands of soldiers in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan who survived because a dock worker from South Philly decided that common sense was worth more than a manual, proving that sometimes the most profound military innovations come not from the generals in the rear, but from the riflemen in the dirt who refused to let their brothers die.